The quilt is heavy in your hands, though it's barely damp from the canyon rain. You didn't mean to find it. You were just walking near the old well, where the earth turned soft after a storm, and saw a corner of fabric pushing through the mud, stitched with faded thread, patched with care, but left as if someone meant for it never to be touched again. You tugged. The earth resisted, then released. And now you're standing alone with a quilt no one claimed, sewn with the quiet labor of a woman who vanished from memory. Until now. You know it's yours before you turn it over, because of the corner, because of the name, your name. Sewn in thread the color of dusk, half faded. Still there, no title, no date, just the name they stopped saying when the other woman took the keys. You fold the quilt gently, like you would a letter, like you would a memory. The wind stirs, pulling loose threads around your fingers. It's been almost 2 years since you arrived in the canyon, since the wagon left you at the foot of that shale path, and the children stared from the porch, silent and still and uncertain. What kind of governess wears boots too worn and eyes too tired to promise anything cheerful? You didn't know what you were walking into then. You just knew you were leaving something behind, your position in Salt Lake, your reputation bruised by rumors, and the letter in your pocket offering work far enough from anyone who remembered your last name. But now the name is sewn into cloth, and someone, at some point, tried to bury it. The cabin rises in the distance, its new roof line sharper than before, a fresh coat of white on the porch rail, though the cane chair still sits crooked, as if it remembers storms better than people do. You walk slowly, the quilt pressed to your chest. No one answers when you step inside. The air smells like cedar shavings and new bread. The boy is nowhere to be seen, neither is his sister. You move to the parlor, lay the quilt across the table. It's patched from scraps you remember using, an old apron, the hem of a curtain, the torn sleeve of the boy's winter coat. But there's more. Patches you don't recognize. Pale yellow muslin embroidered with initials, deep red flannel marked with a name you thought never made it into the ledger. And one square, carefully centered, stitched with a house no longer standing. You reach for the edge, the name again, yours, unmistakable. It feels like proof, though no one's asking yet. You hear a floorboard creak upstairs. You don't call out. You don't need to, because the sound of small feet on stairs hasn't changed, and neither has the way the boy moves when he doesn't want to be noticed. He stands at the bottom step, watching. His hands are at his sides. His shirt is wrinkled, half-buttoned. His eyes go to the quilt, then to you. "I found it," you say softly, "near the old well." He doesn't blink. You remember it, don't you? He nods, a slow, careful motion, like he's deciding what remembering means. "I didn't think it mattered," he whispers. "After they said—" He stops. You wait. He steps forward, then sits, not beside you, but close enough for breath. "I helped you sew the square with the horses," he says. You smile. "You did." He reaches out, fingertips grazing the house patch. "She told me not to say your name anymore," he whispers. "Said it didn't belong to the new papers." Your throat tightens. "But it belonged to me," he adds. You place your hand over his. The wind rattles the porch railing. He says, "She's gone to town. Won't be back till tomorrow." You nod. He says, "I think it's time someone else saw this." You look down at the quilt and realize what you've sewn isn't just memory. It's a record, a map, a truth no one expected to rise from the dirt, whole and stitched, and naming what others buried. The boy stands, goes to the door, then turns back. "Will you come with me?" You nod. Fold the quilt once more, hold it gently, and follow him toward the morning light. The first thing they gave you was a cold room and a cracked bowl of porridge. The second thing was silence. You arrived at the canyon cabin at the tail end of October. Too late to turn back, too early for the storm that pinned you inside for 9 days. You came with one trunk, a letter of recommendation folded and worn from the journey, and gloves that didn't keep the cold from settling into your fingertips. No one met you at the road. You walked the last mile alone. When you crested the ridge and saw the chimney smoke, you thought it might be kindness waiting. But it wasn't kindness. It was obligation. The door opened before you could knock. The woman didn't smile, didn't offer her name, just stepped aside and said, "We'll speak when the children sleep." You followed her in. The cabin had 2 stories, but only the downstairs was warm. A stove crackled in the corner. 2 pairs of small boots sat by the door, one dusted with mud, the other bone dry. She gestured to the stairs. "They're yours now." You blinked. "The children?" "No," she said. "The ours." Then turned and left you to them. You climbed the stairs slowly. The hallway was dim. The wallpaper curled at the edges. 2 rooms. The first was the boys', neat, almost empty, save for a stack of books and a single wooden horse missing one leg. The second was the girls', pink ribbon pinned above the window, blankets folded sharp at the corners, as if no one dared use them. They didn't speak that first night. You read from a tattered copy of Pilgrim's Progress. Your voice shook on the cold vowels, and the girl blinked at you with eyes too old for her face. The boy turned his back before the second page. You tucked them in, whispered good night. Neither answered. Downstairs the woman waited. She poured tea but didn't drink it. "They haven't spoken since she passed," she said. You didn't ask who. She added, "It's not your place to bring it up." You nodded, because you needed the job. Because you needed somewhere to be that wasn't Salt Lake, wasn't the boarding school, wasn't the narrow hallway where they whispered your name like it was something to be rinsed off the linens. You finished the tea. It was bitter. She handed you keys, small brass, wrapped in cloth. "You'll use the side door," she said, "and you'll leave the lamp burning in the hallway. He's afraid of the dark, though he won't say so." You didn't ask about wages, not that night. You climbed to your room, unpacked your things, one extra dress, a pair of wool stockings with a hole in the heel, and the beginnings of the quilt. 3 squares sewn during the ride west, one embroidered with a tree that looked more like a fork than an oak. The silence became habit. The children didn't warm, but they didn't resist. You taught them letters. You boiled rice. You patched the hem of the girl's dress and watched the boy stare at the crack in the ceiling like it held answers he'd never say aloud. The woman disappeared most mornings. She returned with market goods, sometimes wet boots, once with blood on the sleeve of her coat. You didn't ask, because you still needed the job. But the loneliness came in different shapes. It came in the way the girl whispered to her doll, but never to you. It came in the way the boy drew houses with no doors. It came in the way you started stitching late into the night, not for comfort, but for record. Because if they would not speak, and she would not write, then someone had to remember. You stitched what you saw, the girl's ribbon, the cracked teacup, the crooked chair on the porch. You stitched a chimney that leaned left. You stitched a horse with 3 legs. You stitched the initials no one else said aloud, yours. And you hid the quilt behind the drawer under the floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth. Not because you were ashamed, but because you weren't sure you'd be allowed to keep what you made. You learned that the woman was not their mother. You learned that the father was away, always just missed him by days. You learned that grief could look like routine and that forgetting someone often started with denying the sound of their name. But you didn't forget. Not them. Not yourself. Even when they asked you to wear the other woman's apron, even when they slipped her name onto the church register beside yours, even when the boy left a note on your windowsill, just a drawing of a house with 2 names above the door. Hers and yours. You stitched that too, not out of pride, but out of warning, because someday someone might dig through the dirt, might find fabric where there should have been stone, and they would ask, who was the woman who lived here? And now, after the years and the silence and the false titles, you have an answer, sewn with your hands, buried in winter, lifted in spring. There is a room in the cabin that's always locked. You asked once, early on, when you noticed the door that never opened, tucked behind the stairs just left of the parlor. You were told it was storage, a place for things that didn't belong elsewhere, but you knew better. You'd lived in too many homes where silence hid more than dust. One afternoon after the children's lessons, you paused in front of that door, ran your fingers along the frame. The wood was smoother there, worn from turning the knob too many times. The key wasn't on the ring she gave you, but the boy had drawn it. You found it in his sketchbook weeks later, a crooked outline of the house, the parlor, the staircase, and a small door beside it, with a mirror drawn above it. But you'd never seen a mirror in that hallway. When you asked him about it, he only shrugged. Was it a dream? You pressed. He shook his head. You waited. He whispered, it broke when Mama left. It was the first time he'd used that word. Mama. You didn't ask which woman he meant, because grief doesn't always come in clear names. Sometimes it's a cracked mirror. Sometimes it's a boy who draws blue squares with no explanation. That night you sat on the stairwell and stared at the door. It didn't move. Neither did you, until the wind shifted. A gust came through the chimney and the hallway moaned, soft but enough to make the old wallpaper tremble at its seams. You stood, stepped to the door, pressed your ear against it. Silence, but not the kind that's empty, the kind that's listening. You turned back to your room, pulled out the quilt. That night you stitched the hallway, the door, and above it, a mirror that reflected nothing. You didn't know why, you just knew it belonged. The next morning, the mistress caught you in the act of folding the quilt. She didn't ask what it was, but she stared too long at the square with the mirror, then said, "You'll keep your needlework to the upstairs. I don't like the mess in the common rooms." You nodded, but you didn't stop. You stitched in secret, because stitching was the only way to speak what you weren't allowed to ask. And every thread became a question. The girl began humming tunes you hadn't taught her, small, strange lullabies with unfamiliar rhythms. When you asked where she learned them, she simply said, "From the other one." You said, "What other one?" She pointed at the room with the locked door. There was no other governess in the records, no other woman mentioned by the townsfolk. But you'd seen the handwriting on the bottom of the pantry shelf, a name carved with a paring knife, the same name embroidered on the child's handkerchief tucked into the edge of the mattress. So you wrote it on the quilt, just one square, white on white, barely visible unless the light caught it. RLM. The girl traced it with her finger one morning and whispered, "She was nice." You didn't ask how she remembered. Some truths surface gently, like dust in a sunbeam, but others hit harder, Like when the mistress caught the boy sketching again, this time, the room behind the door wide open, with a woman standing inside. She tore the page, burned it in the hearth, then turned to you. "He's filling his head with ghosts," she snapped. You said nothing, but your hand went to the quilt. That night, she knocked on your door. You opened it. She stood with the lamp held high, casting more shadow than light. "You're getting too comfortable," she said. You let the silence answer. She added, "They're not your children." You nodded. "They're not yours either," you said. Her face paled. But she didn't speak again, just turned. Left you in the hallway with the echo of a name that no one wanted to claim. The next morning, the door was still locked. But the wallpaper beside it had been torn, and in the place where the mirror had once hung, there was a nail, just one, bent, holding nothing. So you stitched that too, the empty nail, the broken square, the space where reflection should have lived. Because if no one would tell their story, you would, one patch at a time. And maybe someday someone would press a hand to the fabric and feel the outline of a life no longer erased. The boy doesn't speak, not in full words, not for months. He answers in drawings, in glances, in where he chooses to sit when he enters a room. He never looks at you directly unless he's trying to understand how much you already know. And you learn to listen without asking. Because boys raised in rooms with locked doors and names, they're not allowed to say, don't give answers the way other children do. Instead, they leave clues, a half-bitten apple left on the railing, like a forgotten offering, a blanket folded round nothing, a pine cone tucked into the cuff of your sleeve. He starts bringing you objects, quietly, never explained. One morning it's a feather, then a button, then once a sliver of glass wrapped in cloth. You unwrap it slowly and realize it's from a mirror, curved at the edge, still holding a faint trace of light. You don't ask where he found it, but you stitch a piece of silver thread into the quilt that night, weaving it into the square with the door, letting it shimmer like breath. He sees it the next morning and doesn't smile, but he does sit beside you instead of across the room. That's how you know it matters. He's clever. His drawings grow more detailed. You find one on your pillow, a small cabin on fire, a woman inside, reaching for something under the floor. It's not hard to guess what that something is. You trace the edges with your thumb and wonder how many stories this boy has tried to carry without words. One afternoon, while the girl naps, you offer him a needle and thread. He eyes it like it's a weapon, then like it's a puzzle. You say, "You don't have to talk, you can stitch." He takes it slowly. He sews a single straight line onto a scrap of muslin, then another. Then a crooked shape that looks like a window cracked in one corner. When he hands it back, there's no triumph, just watching. As if to say, "You see now," you nod. Later, you sew that square into the quilt. Next to it, you add a patch with no design, just a space. You leave the thread long and loose. He tugs on it the next day, then points at your name stitched in the corner. "I remember," he whispers. You stop breathing. It's the first full sentence he's given you, and it's your name. Later, when the mistress comes back from town and demands to know what happened to the girl's hem, he doesn't speak, but he draws a line between her and the quilt, then walks out. The mistress doesn't understand. You do. Because silence is how he tells the truth when no one's listening, and stitching is how you answer without being punished. The girl watches all of this. She's younger, but not softer. She knows what fear looks like. She folds napkins with the precision of someone who's been punished for crumbs on the floor. You show her how to fold cloth into birds. She laughs. Only once, but it's real. You stitch that sound into the quilt, too. Two flying shapes, sky blue against the corner where the boy left the mirror shard. That night, the wind howls. The door under the stairs rattles. You don't go to it. You wait. Let the wind pass. Let the boy sleep. Let the silence settle. Because tomorrow he might say another word, or he might bring you a ribbon with blood on one end, and you'll stitch that too, because he's telling the truth the only way he knows. And if you keep listening long enough, he might remember the rest of your name. The orchard lies just beyond the ridge, behind the smokehouse and the leaning fence. You find it by accident, chasing the girl's ribbon after it slips from her braid and dances off on a sudden gust. She runs after it, but the slope is steep and her boots aren't laced right. So you catch up, hold her hand, and descend together. That's when you see the trees. They're thin, half wild, barely tended since last year's frost. But they hold life, early spring buds, pale and trembling in the wind, and something else, tucked beneath the base of the third tree, ceramic. You kneel. It's a teacup, hairline crack along one side, rim chipped, faint gold leaf still clinging to the edges. You turn it over. The base is marked with initials, O-R-M. Your fingers tighten. You know those letters. You've stitched them. The girl watches you. Quiet, curious. She used to drink from that, she says. Who up? You ask. She shrugs. The other one. There it is again, that ghost. The one who came before you, the one no one mentions unless it slips out of the children's mouths like a habit too deep to erase. You look back at the cabin. The upstairs window is open. The boy's face in shadow, barely visible behind the curtain. You pocket the cup. Let's go, you say gently. But that night you don't sleep. You clean the teacup in silence, then place it beside your basin. It stares back at you, like it remembers what happened in the orchard, what was said, what was dropped, what was never meant to be found. And something settles in you, not fear, not quite defiance, just readiness. The next morning, the mistress sees the cup on your table. Her face stills. Where did you get that? In the orchard. She doesn't speak for a moment. Then, it must have been buried in the snow. That woman dropped everything. You don't ask which woman. She steps forward, takes the cup. For a second, you think she'll throw it. Instead, she places it on the mantel, visible to everyone, like a dare or a warning. The children watch her do it. Neither speaks. The boy tugs your sleeve later, hands you a new drawing. It's of the orchard, but this time the trees are on fire. And in the center, a woman made of stitches and smoke holds a teacup in one hand and a needle in the other. You don't know if it's her or you. So you stitch the scene exactly as he drew it. Square 42. You place it near the bottom edge where hands tend to rest when they pull the quilt closer, where warmth is needed most. That evening, you catch the mistress watching you sew. She doesn't speak, just narrows her eyes and walks away. But you know something has shifted, because objects only return when memory begins to crack. And the cup was never buried. It was placed, left. As if someone believed the orchard would keep secrets better than the house. You sleep lightly that night. The teacup stays on the mantel, untouched. But the next morning, the boy finds a new crack in it, thin, barely visible, but running straight through the initials on the base. You trace it with your thumb, then Go back upstairs and stitch it again, exactly as it is now, because forgetting isn't the same as healing, and some things must be remembered in pieces, especially when the break is what finally lets the truth seep through. The attic was meant to be off limits. She told you that when you arrived. Rotten boards, she said. Dangerous beams. Nothing up there but dust and woodworm. But one morning, early before the children woke, you heard it. Not footsteps, not voices, just a sound like paper breathing. You followed it without meaning to, up the narrow stairs, past the hallway lamp, past the locked door that never stopped whispering. The attic door was ajar. Inside, light sifted through a cracked window. Boxes leaned into one another like drunks. Dust curled in sunbeams, and in the far corner, under a loose board, you saw them. Letters, bound in twine, yellowing at the edges, some unopened, still sealed with wax, others creased from too much rereading. You unwrapped them. The handwriting was delicate, ink faded but precise. Some signed Realm, others not at all. A few addressed to no one, just titles like To the Child when he is old enough and To be opened if the court inquires. Your hands trembled. These weren't housekeeping lists. They were memories, confessions, truths sealed away like kindling too dangerous to keep by the stove. You read the first one. It spoke of the children's mother, not the mistress who now owned the combs and dictated the chores, but the one before her, the one whose portrait had vanished from the parlor, the one whose death was only ever described as an illness. But the letter said otherwise. It spoke of a fall, of someone not supposed to be there, of a scream that never made it into the official story. You folded it shut and kept reading. One letter detailed the boy's fear of water, how he screamed after the accident near the well. Another mentioned the governess before you, how she had written down what she'd seen, hidden it for the children's sake. You weren't the first, but maybe you would be the last. You slipped 3 letters into your apron, left the rest, closed the attic, and locked it from the inside. That evening you laid the quilt across your knees and added a new patch, a stack of papers. A seal cracked open, a child's name scrawled in the margin. You didn't sign it, didn't need to. The next day the mistress came into the parlor with her lips pressed thin. "You've been snooping." You looked up, calm. "Is that what we call remembering now?" Her face flared, but she didn't deny it. She said, "That attic is not yours." You said, "Neither are the stories you buried there." She stepped forward. Her hand gripped the edge of the quilt, like she wanted to tear it, but she didn't, because she saw what was stitched there. Not just symbols, but evidence. The boy entered the room holding his sister's hand. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He pointed at the quilt, at the square with the cracked seal, then sat. She left the room, but not before you saw the fear behind her composure. You waited. You knew she'd return. They always do, the ones with too much to hide. That night, you placed the letters beneath your mattress. Not all of them, just enough. And as the wind pressed against the shutters and the children slept without sound, you sewed a final line under the patch, to be opened when the truth is no longer feared, because secrets can't rot if they're stitched into memory. And someday a judge might want to know what was written. You'll be ready. You already are. He arrived without warning. No rider ahead, no letter, no whisper from town, just the sound of hooves on gravel and the creak of saddle leather in the dusk. You heard the girl's sharp intake of breath before you saw him. The boy froze by the hearth. The mistress stood taller. And then the door opened. He stepped in like a shadow that forgot how to knock. Dust on his coat, gray in his beard, a split across one knuckle, half-healed. He dropped his hat on the table, nodded once at the children, and walked past you without a glance. You felt his absence more clearly than his arrival. The mistress poured him coffee, no sugar, no questions. You stood with your hands still dusted in flour, apron stained, heart drumming for reasons you didn't dare name. Later, you learned his name was Andrew, but he never offered it to you. You were Miss if he said anything at all. That first night, the boy didn't sleep. You found him sitting beside the quilt, tracing a square with his thumb, the one with the orchard, the broken cup. You sat beside him. He didn't speak, but you did. "That's your father," you said gently. He nodded, then said, "He doesn't like things that talk back." You asked, "Do I talk back?" He smiled. "You stitch." That was enough. The next morning you found the father in the barn. He was repairing a broken latch, his hands methodical, his eyes anywhere but on you. You asked if he wanted breakfast. He shook his head. You asked if the boy could help him with chores. He shrugged. You asked if the letters in the attic belonged to him. He looked at you then, only once, hard, sharp, surprised, then, "What attic?" You didn't answer, neither did he. But when you left, you heard him mutter a name under his breath. Not yours, hers. And you realized then he hadn't forgotten the woman who came before you. He'd buried her, the same way he buried every word the boy ever tried to say, every drawing the girl made of the cabin burning, every truth that didn't come with paperwork or silence. You returned to the house, took the letters from beneath your mattress, placed them in a box, then stitched that box onto the quilt, next to a square of ash-gray wool shaped like a locked door. The boy saw it that night, touched the corner, asked, "Will they believe you?" You said, "I'm not sewing for them." "Then who?" "For you." He didn't speak again, but he leaned against your side and let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for years. Later that week, the father sat at the edge of the porch, whittling. He carved a bird, small, wing curved, neck bent. He handed it to the girl, then looked up at you. Still didn't say your name, but this time he didn't look away. That was how you knew he remembered. And remembrance is more dangerous than denial, especially for a man who's built his life on forgetting. It begins to snow again in April, late and thin, but enough to coat the ridge with a quiet white. The children watch from the window, their faces pressed to the glass, breath fogging the panes. You sit by the hearth with the quilt stretched across your knees. It has grown heavy. 87 squares, each one stitched with care, none of them random. Some are obvious, like the orchard tree stitched now with blossoms. Some are hidden, like the square with your name sewn behind the lining, invisible to those who aren't looking for it. You've started stitching more at night, when the house is still, when the man and mistress no longer ask questions, when the boy dreams without screaming, because the quilt has become more than warmth. It's a ledger, a confession, a record no one can burn unless they tear it from your hands. The children have begun bringing you pieces. A button from the coat their mother wore, a scrap of lace from a dress no one's seen since the funeral that never happened, a spool of thread with no color name, just the word grief scratched onto the label. You don't ask where they find these things, they don't say, but each one feels like a secret finally laid bare. The mistress says nothing now. She avoids the quilt, avoids the room when you're in it. You catch her glancing at it once, late in the afternoon, and when the fire was low and your fingers moved slower than usual. Her eyes lingered on one patch. You don't know which. She left the room before you could ask. The father, though, watches. He doesn't pretend anymore. He brings you cloth quietly, never directly, just leaves it folded near the hearth. Once you found a square of canvas marked with tar. Another time, a handkerchief with 3 stitched initials, none of them yours. You add them anyway, because this isn't about ownership, it's about truth. One night the boy asks if you'll ever stop sewing. You answer, when the quilt stops asking. He doesn't understand now, but he will. Years from now, when a court leans forward and asks him where the record is, he'll say, "It was always in the stitching. The quilt is no longer just yours, it's theirs. A shared grief, a soft resistance. And still, you sew. You add the broken comb, the empty mirror frame, the cracked teacup, the attic key that never turned. Each square becomes a breath, each thread a voice. You sew the day the girl sang, the moment the boy whispered your name, the afternoon the mistress dropped a spool of red thread on the stairs and left it there, unraveling down every step. Because even her silence has weight. The quilt is nearly done, only a few squares left. You wonder what they'll hold. You already know the court is coming. You saw the letter she burned, but not fast enough. You saw the name it carried, yours, and you stitched that too. Because nothing disappears here, not if you've sewn it. And when the snow finally melts and the trail to town reopens, someone will ride up the canyon path carrying questions they think have no answers. But the quilt will already be waiting, spread wide, laid bare, soft, and undeniable. The smoke wakes you before the heat does. It snakes beneath the door, thin as a whisper, sharp as old paper catching flame. You're already out of bed when the girl screams. By the time you reach the stairs, the hallway is full of it. Smoke, panic, memory. You grab the quilt, not because you think it will save anything, but because you've sewn too much of the truth into it to let it burn now. The boy is coughing near the landing. You press the quilt around him. He clings to it. Below, the mistress shouts. The fire came from the kitchen. That's what she says. But the floorboards glow red in places they shouldn't, and the smoke doesn't rise the way it should. You know where it's headed, the attic, the one place where everything buried is dry, flammable, fragile. The children are outside now. You shove them into boots and coats, push them through the side door. The mistress is screaming at the flames. The father is nowhere to be seen. You turn back and climb. Each stair crackles. The door to the attic is still shut, but the smell, it's already in the wood. You pull your apron over your face. Open the door. Flames lick the far wall. One box is already ash. Another is blackened, its contents charred at the edges. But the letters, some are still whole. You grab what you can, not all, just enough. A handful bound in a strip of muslin. You shove them inside the quilt, wrap it tight. Then you run. The roof groans above you. The heat screams through the rafters, but you make it. Outside, the boy reaches for you. The girl sobs into your skirt. The mistress falls to her knees in the mud, her eyes fixed not on the damage, but on what you hold. She knows. She always knew. The father arrives late. He sees the smoke, sees the children, sees you holding the quilt like a child, and he asks one question. Did it start upstairs? You look at him. No, you say, then softer. But it tried to end there. He doesn't speak again. Not that night. Not when the cabin smolders. Not when the townfolk ride up from the ridge with buckets and blankets and too many questions. He just watches you and the quilt. Later, when the fire's out and the ashes settle and someone brings a tin of coffee no one drinks, you unroll the quilt and show them, not the whole thing, just one square. The one with the fire already stitched, already warned, already true. They don't say anything, but the quilt doesn't burn, and neither do you. Because survival is not just running from flame, it's knowing where the fire started and who lit the match. The letter comes 2 days after the smoke clears. No stagecoach, no rider in uniform, just a plain envelope left on the porch railing, edges softened by snow, sealed with wax that's already cracking from the cold. The mistress finds it first. You hear the screen door creak, then silence. No sound of it being brought inside, just her boots crunching on the walk. Then the slam of her bedroom door. The letter stays where it is. You wait until dusk. By then, the children are asleep, and the fire has burned down to coals. You step outside and pick it up. The wax bears a court seal. Your name is written in a hand you recognize only from formal documents, the kind that doesn't ask, but expects. You open it slowly. It's not long, just a date, a time, a location, and a single line. You are summoned to testify in the matter of guardianship and contested estate. You read it twice, then a third time, and suddenly the quilt in your lap feels heavier. You already knew this would come. The fire was never just an accident. It was erasure. But the past doesn't burn when it's been stitched. You fold the letter and place it between 2 finished squares, one showing the orchard in winter, the other a lantern left unlit. When the father returns from town the next morning, you're waiting. You hand him the summons. His eyes darken. "She sent it," he says, not asking. You shake your head. "I think the court asked for me directly." His jaw works, like he's grinding a word between his teeth. "She'll fight it," he says. You nod. "I know." "She'll lie." "I know that too." He stares at you for a long time, then says, "You'll need protection." You don't ask what kind, because it's not the kind you can wear, it's the kind you sew. That night, you finish the last 4 squares of the quilt. One shows the attic window, one shows the broken teacup in the snow, one shows the girl's ribbon, half buried in orchard mud, and the last just thread circling a blank space, unnamed, unwritten. A square waiting for the court. You don't sleep, you pack in the morning. One bag, the quilt wrapped around the letters. The children don't ask where you're going. The boy only hands you a new drawing. It's a courtroom, a judge with no face, a woman holding up a quilt, and a child pointing at it. You fold the paper and place it inside your coat. The father helps you hitch the wagon. He doesn't speak, not until you're ready to step up. Then he says, "It should have been you all along." You pause, then ask, "Why wasn't it?" His eyes flick toward the house. She was louder. You nod. Louder wins. Until proof arrives with thread and testimony, you leave at first light. The trail is slick. The wind bites. But your name is real. And this time it's been written in more than dust. It's been sewn. And soon, spoken. The courtroom is colder than you expect. Not because of the weather, it's early spring now, the frost lifting, but because of the silence, the kind that presses down from the rafters and seeps into your collar, even with the quilt folded across your lap like a shield. The judge enters. People don't rise quickly. It's a small town. They all know his face. Some knew his father's. Your name is called. You step forward. The room doesn't gasp. This isn't a trial for drama. It's quiet, civil. The kind of hearing meant to settle guardianship disputes and tidy up unwanted legacies. But the boy is there, and so is the mistress, and the father, leaning against the far wall like he's not part of any of it, though his silence threads through the room like a needle waiting to stitch a verdict. The clerk asks if you swear to tell the truth. You nod. Your voice doesn't tremble. You tell them how you came to the canyon, how the children were quiet, how the woman who called herself their caretaker wouldn't let anyone speak the name of the one before. You don't embellish. You don't need to. The quilt lies open across the table. The judge glances at it. You say, "Every square is something they didn't want remembered." He raises an eyebrow. "Who's they?" You look at the mistress. She looks away. Then the boy stands. No one asked him to. He's not on the docket. He's not expected to say anything. His voice has never been recorded by this court, but he steps forward. His hands tremble. The clerk tries to stop him, but the judge lifts a hand. Let him speak. The boy turns toward the quilt, then toward you. He swallows and says your name, not your title, not Miss, not the placeholder they gave you when you first arrived. Your real name, first and last. Clear, then? She's the one who listened. She's the one who stayed. He pauses, then adds, she remembered things for us. The judge looks at the quilt again, then at the letters you retrieved from the fire, then back at the mistress. She stands, her voice sharp. He doesn't know what he's saying. He's a child. But the boy doesn't flinch. He points to the quilt. There's a square with the cup, the one Mama used. The room stills. The judge asks, "You remember your mother?" He nods, then, "She said to trust the one who sews." No one breathes. The mistress tries again. She twisted his memories. You say nothing. You don't have to. The quilt is open to the page with the orchard, the cup, the initials, RLM. The judge looks at the father, says nothing, but the silence is an invitation, and the father steps forward, picks up the square with the comb. "I remember this," he says softly. He doesn't look at you, just at the fabric. This was hers, before the accident. He swallows, then says, "I should have asked where it went." The judge leans back, folds his hands, then speaks. "In 30 years, I've never seen a record kept like this." His eyes drift across the room. To remember someone through cloth is to refuse their erasure. You close your eyes, just for a second, because your name has now been said aloud, by the child, by the court. And even if nothing else is settled today, that truth has been stitched into public record. The boy walks back to his seat, but not before placing one hand on your shoulder. Warm, steady, enough. The courtroom has emptied. Dust hangs in the shafts of afternoon light. The boy rests his head on the bench, asleep, the quilt curled near his side. The girl traces the stitching with a fingertip, her eyes moving like she's reading the story for the first time. The judge calls you back. His chambers are small, lined with ledgers, maps, and aging photographs. He doesn't sit behind the desk. He leans against it, arms crossed, your box of saved letters in front of him. "I've read them," he says. You wait. Some are confessional, some rambling. But all of them tell one thing plain. There was a woman here raising these children, trusted by their mother, and there was another who tried to overwrite her. You nod. He taps the letters. This handwriting, it's careful. She wrote like she knew she might not be believed unless every line was neat. You say, she wasn't believed while she was alive. No, he agrees, But death doesn't protect liars either. He gestures to a particular letter, the one labeled, "To be opened if the court inquires." It's addressed to you, but it was written before you ever arrived. You open it slowly. Inside, her words are quiet, direct. She describes her fear of being dismissed, of what would happen to the children if she were gone, of how easy it would be for the wrong person to take over simply because they knew how to speak louder. She writes, "If you find this, then you were meant to." She ends it with, "Tell them I was real. Stitch me into what survives." You fold the letter, place it into the judge's hand. "She wrote with more care than I ever could," you say. "I just kept her promises." The judge looks down, then says, "Sometimes justice isn't a gavel. It's remembering." You leave the room holding less than you brought, but more than you had. The children walk beside you, the quilt tucked back into your arms. Outside, the father waits, his hat in hand, his eyes low. He says, "She hated that quilt." You nod. She hated anything she couldn't control. He nods back. Then, carefully, like lifting something fragile, he says, "I should have asked where my children were learning to love again." You don't answer, because he already knows. The girl slips her hand into yours. The boy carries the quilt now, because it's his, too. They ask if they can come back to the cabin. You say, "It's ours, isn't it?" The boy smiles. The father breathes out. And though the day is cold and the snow still patches the ridge, something warmer begins beneath your ribs. A name remembered. A woman no longer erased. A truth held in both ink and thread. You ride home in silence. But the silence is different now. It listens. It holds. And somewhere in your coat pocket, that final letter rests, creased, real, waiting to be sewn into the last space left on the quilt. She arrived at the hearing late, not in disgrace, no, not her style. In control, with a stiff collar and black gloves and an expression polished like silver. She did not look at the children. She barely acknowledged the judge. She looked only at you, then at the quilt, then away. They called her to the stand. She didn't hesitate. She spoke in even tones, recounting her service to the family, her claim that the mother had been ill, that the previous governess had been dismissed for impropriety, that the children had always been safe under her care. You watched her lie as though reading scripture. Her voice never cracked. Her hands never trembled. But her words bent subtly like branches in a wind no one else could feel. She paused only once. When the judge asked, "Do you recognize this object?" and gestured to the square on the quilt with the cracked teacup. Her eyes narrowed. She said, "It's sentimental. I kept it for the boy." But the boy had already said otherwise. The judge pressed further. "And this?" he asked, pointing to the stitched letter, the attic square, the mirror frame. She said, "I cannot speak to the embroidery of unstable minds." You felt your jaw tighten. The judge asked, "Did you ever prevent the children from mentioning their former governess?" Her mouth flattened. "I protected them from confusion." He leaned back. "And yet they are quite clear now." She said, "Children remember what they're told to remember." And for the first time the boy stood again. He walked across the room, quiet as snowfall. He pointed to the square with the orchard, then to the one with the flame, then said, "No one told me that." She tried to speak, but he turned away. The judge let the silence stretch, long, unblinking, and when it finally broke, it came not from her, but from the clerk who read aloud one of the final letters, written by the mother herself. "If anything happens to me, let the one who listens guide them, the one who sows, the one who sees without needing to be seen. The words hung in the air, soft, absolute. The mistress did not flinch, but she did not speak again. Later, after the courtroom emptied and judgment was reserved for final filing, you found her outside by the steps. She stood alone. No coat, no gloves now, just wind and silence. You stepped beside her. She didn't look at you, but she said, "You think this story belongs to you." You replied, "I never wanted it to." Her voice dropped. "He promised me something after she died, after I stayed." You said, "You stayed for control. I stayed for them." She turned slowly, her face not cruel now, but exhausted. "You won't win everything. I don't need to," you said. And that was the difference. You stepped away. The children waited by the wagon, the quilt folded in their arms. Behind you, the woman who once erased names was finally left with her own. Small, cold, unclaimed. It was raining when you returned to the canyon, not snow this time, but something softer. A spring rain, light as breath, soaking the ridge line and draping the orchard in silver. The boy walked ahead. The girl held your hand. The father followed quiet, not out of distance, but respect. When you reached the cabin, the door was open, not broken, not forced, just unlocked. You stepped inside. Nothing had changed, and everything had. The ashes from the fire had been swept, though the scent lingered. The old wallpaper still curled above the parlor window, and the crooked chair sat just where it always had, slightly off-center, always remembering storms. On the table sat a single object, wrapped in muslin. You unwrapped it slowly. It was the key, the one to the attic, cleaned, oiled, set like an offering. Beside it, a folded scrap of paper unsigned, but you knew the handwriting. They're asking questions now. Let the door open if they knock. You placed the key in your palm and felt its weight, heavy, earned. The children climbed the stairs without being told. The boy opened the attic door. No hesitation, no ghosts, just light from the new window the father must have fixed. Inside, boxes remained, some unopened, some repacked. But the shelf in the corner was different. A wooden rack built with care, and on it, laid flat, perfectly centered, the quilt, pressed, whole, every square visible. You stepped forward, ran your fingers along the edge. A new square had been added, not by your hand. It showed two hands, one older, one small, pressing a stitch together. Below it, a name, not yours, not hers, ours. You closed your eyes. The boy leaned against the wall, said, "We didn't want it to end." You replied, "It doesn't." Because stories sewn into cloth don't die. They live. Through hands, through thread, through the quiet refusal to forget. Later that evening, the girl asked if you'd teach her to stitch. You said yes. She chose a scrap of rose calico. You didn't guide her hand, just let her try. She stitched the cabin roof, crooked, sweet, real. You added a final square beside it, empty, save for a single silver thread crossing the center. The future, waiting. The father watched from the porch, didn't speak. But when you passed him the key, he didn't refuse. He said, "I'll hang it where it belongs." You nodded, because it does now. This home, once made of silence and erasure, had been given back its voice. You returned to the quilt that night, smoothed its edges, and whispered names aloud, all of them, one by one, so that no stitch would forget. and no child would have to carry a story alone. Evening settles like smoke in the canyon. The fire is low but warm. Rain taps gently at the shutters. You sit with the quilt draped across your lap, the girl nestled beside you, needle in hand, pulling thread through calico like it holds the sky together. The boy rests nearby, sketching again. His lines are slower now, more deliberate. There are no flames in this picture, just a cabin. Whole, safe, a tree in bloom outside, a bird on the sill. He hands it to you. You smile, fold it gently, and tuck it between the pages of the old prayer book you never quite learned to use. The father pours tea. There are 4 cups now. No one comments on that, and then, as if he's been waiting for silence to soften the moment, he says it. Your name, not in passing, not clipped or half swallowed. He says it like it belongs, like it always did. And the room stills, just for a breath. The children glance up. The girl smiles. The boy nods like he already knew this was coming. You don't answer right away, because there's something sacred about being spoken into a room without being summoned. He clears his throat. You built this house back together, he says. You shake your head. We all did. He pours more tea, then adds, but you're the one who remembered how. The wind shifts. The rain eases. Somewhere outside, the orchard exhales. Later, you stand at the hearth. The quilt folded neatly, now part of the cabin, not decoration, but presence. A testament, a record, not just of sorrow, but survival. You hang it on the wall, not high, not hidden, just there, where hands can touch it, where stories breathe. The girl tugs your sleeve. Will people forget again? She asks. You kneel beside her, say, only if we stop stitching. She thinks on this, then whispers, I won't stop. Neither will you, because thread is memory. And names stitched in silence last longer than ones written in ink. The boy stands beside you now. He holds out something. It's the final square, the one he's made himself. Crude, unsteady, but true. It shows the quilt, small, inside another square. He's drawn you there, holding it, holding them. You add it to the bottom row, the last piece. You press your palm to it, feel warmth beneath the cloth. Like the hearth, the breath, the hush of names once forgotten, now spoken, now safe. The rain stops completely. A stillness settles in the bones of the house. No ghosts remain, just the story, whole, woven, enduring.